I'm Beth Accomando, host of the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast, and I just relaunched the podcast with some new features, and one of those new features is a video called Geeky Gourmet. So for each podcast, I'm going to do a video that'll show you how to make some sort of food or drink item that's themed to the topic of the podcast. So the podcast was all about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and celebrating pop culture and Comic-Con. So I decided we'll make some cookies. And I have a collection of 3D printed ones because I do a lot of themed cookies. So, you can do Jaws, you can do Creature from the Black Lagoon, but today we are going to be doing comic book movie cookies that go pow, bang, pop. And so I'm going to take out my classic Batman cookie cutter. And then you've got this shape that you can put those fight sound effects in. So pow, bang, zoom, kaplooey, whatever. And then also, if you have some clever quotes, there's always the versatile cartoon bubble. So those are the cookie cutters we're going to be using today. Okay, so what we're going to be making today are sugar cookies. This isn't my own personal recipe. This is from Warp Zone Prints, but I have to say this is, as it says, the best ever sugar cookie recipe. It's super versatile. You can add a little bit of spice to it if you want, a little cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, pumpkin spice. And the only thing I do a little different is this calls for 1.5 cups of sugar. I usually use closer to a cup of sugar. I find that if you reduce the sugar content in a lot of dessert recipes, all the other flavors in the cookies tend to pop a lot more and it just tastes better. And guess what? Nobody seems to ever miss the sugar. The items you're going to need are butter, sugar, flour, Greek yogurt, full fat, don't cheat on that, it does make a difference, baking soda, salt, egg, and nutmeg, vanilla, and cinnamon. So we're going to have the butter and sugar in here, and we are going to mix that until it gets really light and fluffy. And then we're going to add 1 egg, and all your items should be at room temperature. Okay, then we're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla and the yogurt. And again, use Greek yogurt, full fat. Okay, and then you're going to take 3 3/4 cup of flour, and we're going to sift that with the baking soda and salt, cinnamon, and also some freshly grated nutmeg. Okay, so then once you mix it together, that's it, it's done. And the great thing about this cookie dough is you can take it straight from the mixer to rolling it out. It doesn't need to be refrigerated, but if you're rolling it out and it tends to stick a little too much or you're having a little trouble with the cookie cutters, go ahead and refrigerate it for an hour and then it should be a lot easier to work with. But the nice thing is you don't have to do that. And if you're running late like I always am, it's great to be able to just take it straight from the mixer and go ahead and roll your cookies out. You're going to need a silicone mat that you can roll the cookie dough out on, and a rolling pin. Ideally, if you have a kind of rolling pin that allows you to consistently roll the thickness, these are 1/4 inch thick guides so that the cookies will all be the same thickness. I put a little bit of flour on the cookie cutter just so that it makes it come out a little cleaner. So you want to make sure you press down really firmly. There we go, and that one's ready for any kind of fight action, especially from Batman. This dough is super forgiving, so you can actually roll it out a couple of times. I know there's some cookie dough recipes where they tell you once you've rolled it out once or twice, it really doesn't taste as good, but this one tastes just fine, and it doesn't make them tough or less airy or less fluffy. These cookies are really great. Batman! Okay, and we want to set the oven to 350. Okay, and then you want to put them on your cookie sheet and pop them in the oven for about 11 minutes, but check them. You want them to be just a touch golden around the edges, and you don't want to overcook them because they taste nice when they're kind of light and fluffy. Okay, so now you want to make the icing, and this is going to be very simple. It's going to be powdered sugar. You can start with a cup, roughly. And then what I find is the best is to use lemon juice with that. It gives it a really nice tang and cuts the sweetness and tastes great with these sugar cookies. Okay, so mix in some lemon juice and then also a little bit of Karo syrup. So with comic book cookies, you want to have some great primary colors. So red, yellow, blue. Yellow is a good color because it's easy to write on. Anything will show up pretty easily. Red and blue are sometimes a little harder. So here are a few things that are going to be useful in helping you make the cookies. A brush so that you can put down the first layer of icing. Some edible food markers, especially a black edible food marker, because if you want to do those cartoon bubbles the easiest way possible, it'll be to just write with this, because not everybody can write with a pastry bag. Okay, now the cookies are out of the oven and it's time to decorate. So I don't know how to do this without making a huge mess. So I always put the cooling rack on top of something so I can clean up a little more easily. And before the pandemic, I used to use gloves all the time when I frosted the cookies. Now I feel a little hesitant to waste a glove on just icing cookies, but it does make it a little bit easier. So for the cartoon bubbles, I suggest at least some of them, make them just plain white. Okay, now that you're done icing, it's time for patience. You just have to walk away for a little bit and let them dry completely. What you want to do now, and this is where the markers can come in handy, is you want to give it the black outline that is so iconic of comic book images and graphics. This is where some artistic skill can come in handy, which I don't really have. So you can do an outline on it, and then you can write something. Since we were talking about the Marvel Universe, there's a Hulk smash. Okay, so if baking cookies isn't exactly your thing, maybe you want to try chocolates. So these are some molds you can use to make some comic book themed chocolates. And I'm going to try a little experiment with these and use some dust, some gold dust that you can put in. This is edible. And I'm going to see how it works when we pop these chocolates out. And then another experiment, I'm going to try this powder here, which happens to glow under black light. This is my Reanimator reagent. And I decided I just want to give it a test on the chocolate. And here's a little experiment dusting that powder and a little gold dust on one of the cookies. And see what happens when you use the black light. This stuff is amazing. I found it on Etsy. It is FDA approved. And apparently you can eat it without any problems. I have, and I'm still here to talk about it. So anyway, let's see what happens after we make these chocolates. So I'm going to simply use one of these really simple Wilton chocolate melting pots. You can also melt chocolate in the microwave. You have to do it very low and very slowly to make sure you don't burn it, or you can do it over a double boiler too. So there's many ways that you can melt chocolate and use it. One key thing about melting chocolate is do not let water get anywhere near it. If it does, it can make the whole thing freeze up and just ruin the batch of chocolate you're melting. So make sure all of the instruments you're using are dry and the bowl that you're melting the chocolate in is completely dry. And with this, we're just going to let it melt and stir it up and then pour it into the molds I have. Okay, and now the moment of truth for the chocolates. Let's see how they turn out. There's a wham. Reagent added to POW. Well, that concludes this edition of Geeky Gourmet, and here's what your comic book cookies could look like. Yeah, I wish I had better artistic skills, but I can guarantee you they taste good. And I also made some comic book chocolates, which I think turned out a little bit better. And remember to head on over to kpbs.org/cinemajunkie to listen to the companion podcast, which was all about comic book movies. I spoke with Professor Arnold T. Blumberg about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He taught the first college class on the MCU. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you check out the podcast. And coming up on future editions of Geeky Gourmet, I'll show you how to make edible blood and how to make the intermission treats that you would have at a Bollywood movie. So till our next film fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.